Amongst the many towering peaks of the Nepalese Himalayas stands a magnificent mountain known as Cho Oyu. It is the sixth tallest mountain in the world, with its summit reaching an altitude of 8,188 meters, making it one of only 14 8,000 meter peaks in the entire world as well. These so-called 8,000ers are extremely popular with mountaineers, as scaling one of these great peaks holds a certain prestige, and ascending any one of them is no easy task. Cho Oyu is widely considered to be the easiest of the 8,000ers to climb, with a fairly moderate slope and a straightforward route to the summit. And because of this, it is extremely popular for guided expeditions, with Cho Oyu being the second most climbed 8,000er behind only Mount Everest. And while it may have the reputation as the easiest of the 8,000ers, the mountain still holds many dangers to eager mountaineers hoping to reach its summit. On April 15, 2000, a small expedition party arrived at the advanced northwest base camp at Cho Oyu. The party of 9 was a mix of Finns and Russians, with the Russians leading the expedition as they were the most experienced mountaineers of the group. They planned to climb the typical route up the northwest face of the mountain, with 3 camps along the way, at 6,400 meters, 7,000 meters, and 7,400 meters. They joined 2 other expedition parties, a Korean team and an Iranian team at Advanced Base Camp, and seeing that the other teams had already begun to set the routes for their own summit bids, the group of 9 got straight to making their way up the mountain and establishing their camps, along with acclimatizing to the altitude. By April 17th, the expedition had reached Camp 1, and the climbers began hauling gear from Advanced Base Camp to Camp 1, as the Sherpas from the Korean and Iranian expeditions worked on setting the line between Camp 1 and Camp 2. However, their progress was halted on April 20th as the weather had fouled and the party descended back to base camp to wait out the blizzard and get some rest. On April 21st, the weather had cleared a bit, and so the group planned to bring more supplies to Camp 1, and if the weather remained good, make a push for Camp 2. Between Camp 1 and Camp 2 is an icefall requiring climbers to navigate their way up the icefall and across a 200-meter long slick ice sheet in order to reach Camp 2. By this point, several of the climbers had begun to experience altitude sickness, so the group decided to take the next few days to rest and acclimatize. This well-needed rest had reinvigorated the party, and by April 27th, they had reached Camp 2 and began hauling up supplies and planning their push up to the final camp, Camp 3 at 7,400 meters, while they took the next few days to rest. On May 2nd, the 3 most experienced Russian climbers of the group reached Camp 3 and set up their tents, but were quickly repelled by the worsening weather, and they recalled the strong winds nearly whisking them off the ground as they descended back to base camp. The foul weather seemed to clear soon after, however, and so, with this new weather window opening up, the rest of the group decided to make a push for Camp 3, and if the weather held, perhaps even the summit. This push was led by the remaining Russian man, a 38-year-old man named Pavel Bonatysenko, who had not joined the other Russians in their previous push to Camp 3 due to altitude sickness. The Finnish side of the expedition's team leader, a 50-year-old man named Jorma Alonen, along with a 25-year-old woman named Noora Toivonen, followed close behind Pavel, and united with him at Camp 3 on the evening of May 4th. On the morning of May 5th, the weather was clear, and Pavel and Noora, feeling fresh and energetic, decided to take the opportunity to make a push for the summit. Jorma did not join them, as he was exhausted and decided to get some sleep instead. And while the sun was shining that morning, it was still bitterly cold, reaching temperatures around -40 degrees as the wind lashed the climbers. And so at 5:30 a.m., the duo set off and began to make their way up the final stretch of the route and to the summit, a trip that was estimated to take around 10 to 12 hours, with the pair expecting to arrive back at Camp 3 before sundown. At around 12:15 p.m., base camp established radio contact with Noora to check in how the pair were faring in their bid for the summit. Noora replied, "It's really cold if you stop. Otherwise, it's just fine." Base camp informed the pair that the weather was beginning to sour again as a storm approached, and emphasized that if they wanted to reach the summit that day, they would need to hurry. Approximately an hour after making radio contact with Noora, observers at base camp spotted Pavel and Noora near the top, but still an estimated 90 minutes from reaching the foot of the summit plateau, and nearly 2 hours from reaching the true summit after ascending further across a long, open, snowy plateau several hundred meters long. This put them far behind their intended schedule, as according to their plans, they should have reached the top around the time that they made radio contact with base camp. They soon lost sight of the pair again, and the foul weather system began to rapidly approach the slopes of Cho Oyu, and by 5 p.m., the storm had engulfed the entire upper half of the mountain. Back at Camp 3, Jorma began to worry about the pair, as he expected they would have returned by this point, and the weather had devolved into an intense blizzard, with the violent winds lashing against his tent back at camp. As the minutes passed, the rest of the group became increasingly concerned about Nura and Pavel, and just as they were beginning to fear the worst, at approximately 7 p.m., their radios crackled to life. It was Nura on the other end. "Does anyone hear?" she said, as she was cut off mid-sentence by a loud static crackle. They frantically tried to re-establish radio contact, but they were never able to reach the pair again. Jorma continued flashing his headlamp into the darkness outside his tent throughout the night, hoping to be a beacon for the lost climbers to head towards. But after not hearing or seeing from Nura or Pavel again on May 6th, the expedition knew that the pair surely would have died by now. As with the freezing cold conditions on the mountain, and at such an altitude, it was almost impossible that they could still be alive at this point. The foul weather continued for the next few days, as the group deliberated what they should do next. The weather finally cleared up again on May 8th, and the Russian trio that had been resting at base camp during the fateful summit bid decided to make their own push for the summit and look for any evidence of Nura or Pavel along the way, as it was unknown exactly what had befallen them. On May 10th, a small memorial service was held for the pair at base camp. On the 11th, the Korean team reached the summit and reported that they had found footsteps leading from the true summit to the southern side of the summit, where they then lost the trail. The other 3 members of the expedition did complete their ascent to the summit successfully, but did not find any evidence of Pavel or Nura along the way. After the disaster, an investigation found that the pair had likely become lost in the whiteout conditions at the summit, and it seemed that they had wandered off the southern edge of the summit and tumbled down the steep rock face below into Nepal. The investigation found that the climbers were likely behind schedule that day due to not taking the proper time to acclimatize, and they seemed to have pushed themselves too far, too quickly. The duo had not been using supplemental oxygen, and at such altitudes, even small distances become extremely difficult to cover, as the body struggles to supply enough oxygen to sustain the climber. At around 8,000 meters, the oxygen pressure in the air becomes so low that even acclimatized and resting humans cannot sustain their bodies for more than a few days at best. This lower oxygen level also impairs climbers, as above 8,000 meters, the lack of oxygen causes many climbers to make poor, rash decisions, and it impairs motor skills and even causes vivid hallucinations. It was very likely that this impairment played a part in the deaths of Nura Toivonen and Pavel Bonitysyenko as well. The more experienced Russian climbers that had led the expedition noted that the Finns and Pavel had decided to deviate from their planned ascent plan on their own, and since everyone had paid quite a lot of their own money to join the expedition, it was widely accepted that it was ultimately up to each individual's own discretion whether they decided to attempt to reach the summit or not. The Russian climbers maintained that if the group had followed them as they had planned, and not rushed to the top with summit fever during such a volatile weather window, that this disaster likely could have been avoided entirely. Thank you all for watching.